Recording is good. Excellent.
All right. Hello,
Hi,
everyone.
Stephanie.
Hi, Peter. How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Doing well.
See, we have people coming in the room. Everybody find a seat. Oh, everybody gets a front seat.
I love it.
Yep.
Well, welcome. Welcome to APS Webinars. Super excited to have you today. This is the third broadcast in the APS Industry Webinar series, and the title is Activating Industry Physics Careers with Peter Fiske, and this one specifically is going to be around mid-career advancement in the physics industry. I'm Stephanie Hervey, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. Thank you all so much for joining us. So APS webinars are brought to you as a service of the American Physical Society, connecting you with the expertise of individuals who can offer insight into physics careers, educational programs, and professional development for students, working physicists, and educators. APS membership gives you easy access to valuable career information and resources, just like this webinar, which allows you to get research out to the community, network with your employers and colleagues at our meetings. Membership can also help connect you to a community of like-minded folks through participation in our forums, divisions, and topical groups. If you are not an APS member yet, but you value the things that APS provides, we definitely encourage you to join today. One of my wonderful programs, if you're looking to learn more about a career in industry, or you'd like to help others learn about your journey into industry, the APS Impact Mentoring Program is specifically for industry mentors and students looking to dive deeper into industry-related careers. We have hundreds of mentors in all physics disciplines ready to connect with you. Head to impact@aps.org or scan the QR code to register today. Also, APS has a new jobs board. So your next career move in academia, national labs, industry, or more is just a few clicks away. Well, please browse open positions or even create alerts for new job postings. So definitely check out our new jobs board. Some quick housekeeping before we jump in. The first portion of our broadcast will be a presentation by our speaker, Peter, and then we'll have a period of Q&A at the end. If you would like to ask a question, please type it into the Q&A panel, which you can access by clicking the button in the lower right-hand corner of your Zoom webinar window. You can submit questions at any time, and we will do our best to address all of them during the broadcast or after during the special Q&A time. The link to today's recording will be made available on the APS Webinars homepage within 2 to 3 business days. Also, when you leave the webinar today, we encourage you to complete the survey upon exiting so that APS Webinars can improve its ability to provide you with these valuable services. Lastly, before we dive in, we wanted to mention that the next broadcast we have coming up in the series will be on AI and machine learning in the physics industry. And we have some incredible panelists joining us. And we're so excited that Peter, here with us today, will be moderating that discussion. So if you haven't already done so, please make sure you sign up for our webinars mailing list using the link below. And you can also find more information about this broadcast on the main webinars homepage. So with that, we're going to get started. And I'm going to do a quick introduction of Peter, and then he's going to kick it off. So our wonderful speaker today is Peter Fiske. And
Hello.
Thanks. Dr. Peter Fiske of the National Alliance for Water Innovation is a seasoned executive with more than 2 decades of experience leading technology organizations and initiatives across industries such as water, renewable energy, defense, and natural resources. He has successfully commercialized several technologies, including the reactive atom plasma, RAP, processing for optics and semiconductor manufacturing, and biomimicry-inspired high-efficiency fluid mixing and process control technology, PAX Water, and has served as a board member or advisor to a number of technology startups. As CEO of Pax Water Technologies, his team won several major industry awards for advertising and design and maintained profitable growth of 20% per year, culminating the acquisition of a company in January of 2017 in an all-cash transaction.
You're not going to read this whole thing, are you, Stephanie?
No, we'll stop there. Everybody else can, read your bio, and then I'm sure we're going to learn so much about you today during the webinar.
Yeah, well, Stephanie, thank you very much. And as you all know, in addition to all this sort of stuff, we'll be talking today about like life at mid-career, but also I give a every year, gosh, maybe the last 15 years, a workshop at the March meeting. So those of you, typically that's oriented towards early career people, but anybody's welcome to attend the 2.5-hour workshop, and they'll presumably will be there. Also, my book, Put Your Science to Work. Thank you, Stephanie. Put Your Science to Work was my effort earlier in my career to kind of synthesize all that I'd learned. And so I just kind of start by saying that I know that we have, I'm going to take control here, Stephanie. There we go. Now, I know we call this the physics industry, okay? Now, physics industry, like, it's not an industry. There's not factories that only use physicists. We physicists are everywhere. And one of the things I talk about in my career development workshop at the March meeting is all the pathways that you can go on. And while that workshop typically is very attractive to early career people, your career continues to grow, continues to change throughout your life. And so I really appreciated, Stephanie, that we decided to do this topic, mid-career advancement, because as I get older and older and grayer, my credibility talking to younger scientists gets a little looser. So now at least I can talk to people at midlife, et cetera. So happy to have everybody here today. And I would say, as Stephanie said, as questions come to you, put them in the Q&A, and we will talk about them at the end. And also, I know we have a couple early questions that came in by email. So first, a bit about me. And here's the thing. Stephanie, you read this wonderful bio, and it sounds like all this great stuff, but careers are never linear. Careers really only make sense in the rearview mirror. And so they're kind of a collection of things that kind of suddenly seem like they are organized. Like, so my background is geosciences, actually, but I've also had about 20 years in the business world. And I've also, through both those things, had a lot of teaching experience and teaching activity. And the three are really linked together. My undergrad, my grad school, and then my postdoc at Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory gave me a start in the physics area. But then I had a sort of strange turn in which I ended up doing a policy fellowship in 1996 and went to do a thing called the White House Fellowship in the Department of Defense. I then ended up leaving the research world and the bench for my first company, Wrap Industries, as Stephanie mentioned, and then my second company, Pax Water Technologies. But then after Pax Water got sold, I went back into the research world. So now I'm at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory, leading this large program on desalination and water treatment. And all along the way, I have been interested and active in business. I got an MBA at UC Berkeley, and then I teach in several programs, as well as mentoring zillions of wonderful little companies. So, it seems like a lot. And it seems like it's, wow, what an interesting balance of stuff. And honestly, as I was going along, some of the stuff happened accidentally. Some of the stuff happened because I was in the right place at the right time. And some of the stuff represented things that I wanted to move to, but I didn't know how. And so this is like my story is a little bit about career in midlife, is that you are on a track. You may be happily situated or maybe somewhat disquieted in where you are now. And you're beginning to ask yourself, what are the pathways for me at this stage in my career? Now, as Stephanie mentioned, in addition to that work experience, I've also written extensively and lectured extensively on the subject of career development for scientists and engineers. And as Stephanie said, I mentor individuals typically as they are embarking on an entrepreneurial experience. So it's very much the case that I have found that physics-trained individuals make great entrepreneurs, but there's a lot of basic business stuff that is unfamiliar. And so one of the things we do is learn along the way. So what is mid-career for physicists? Let's sort of define this term a little bit. Well, strictly speaking, I would say roughly 10 to 20 years into a career, you become in your mid-career. And in academia, that might say, well, you're just through tenure, but maybe you're an associate professor, et cetera. In industry, I would say you might be a principal technical leader or team leader or an individual contributor. And in government or national lab, you might be a principal technical leader, group leader, or project leader. So those are typical kind of job titles and sort of areas where you might be at mid-career. But in general, you're probably at this point supervising one or a few people. You may manage budgets, projects, and deliverables. So those are kind of all typical things. Now, in our first webinar, we talked about where do physicists go. And so just to review, when you get a bachelor's in physics, there's a cornucopia of places where you end up, but a lot of them end up, even though you're a physics major, you might end up in a career or even a job title called engineer or IT or that sort of thing. But in general, industry is the largest recipient of undergraduates in physics. Similar with physics master's degree students, you often see yourself ending up in computer science, engineering, or other disciplines, even though your degree was in physics. But the private sector, as you see on this bar chart from the American Institute of Physics, private sector remains one of the dominant employers for physicists. And this is really why, and it doesn't end, as Stephanie pointed out, we end up even with physics PhDs of about the 1,500 that are produced in the US every year. After you take out the initial employment, you ask for permanent employment, you see that industry, even for PhDs, industry is a dominant category. And so, as we said at our first webinar, what is the most common career path? It's in industry, which is why we created this webinar series, so that it's not just academics who are listening to this advice. Now, you sit there, well, okay, I show up at this webinar, but like mid-career advancement, like won't I advance anyway? I mean, come on, I'm doing my job, right? And the answer is to some extent, sure. To some extent, you're acquiring new skills and experience. To some extent, there will be more senior people leaving and retiring, making room for others to advance. So to some extent, there is a natural progression and flux in a technical career in industry. But not necessarily forever, and not necessarily on your time frame. Because as the world progresses and as industry and businesses progress, it's possible that new skill sets come along and you may not have the opportunity to acquire every new skill set that's relevant. And in the worst case scenario, you could end up with a set of skills that represent sort of like older way of doing things, or even worse, obsolescence. Now, the other thing is that it is typical that as people progress in their career, they get incremental increases in your salary, which means that you get more expensive with time. So by mid-career, you are more expensive than somebody just getting started. And also, organizations change. Organizations' needs and priorities shift. Something that you were involved in may no longer be a priority for the organization, and that can pose risk to your continued employment, or at least your employment in what you have been doing. And of course, the final thing is that external economic forces exert themselves. And it can be in the private sector with a downturn, and it can force companies to do layoffs and kill projects. In the public sector and national labs, you can also have periods where federal funding is flat, or there's even downturns in funding, and you can actually see reductions in force at national labs. When I started my postdoc at Lawrence Livermore Lab, the first day that I started as a postdoc was one of the first reductions in force at Lawrence Livermore Lab. It was very freaky for people. For many people, a lot of the mid-career people, this was the first time they were confronted with job insecurity. So really, I would say that, we talk about career advancement, but really the other side of that coin is career resilience. Not just, can I advance, but how can I make sure that I am in control of my career throughout my life, and I'm not being kind of swept by forces that are beyond my control. And in fact, that's what we're going to be talking about today, is strategies for doing that. When we had our webinar most recently on how much can you earn in physics in the industry setting, one of the key lessons I talked to you guys about was, what are you worth? And the simple answer is, you better be worth more than your employer is paying you. Because if you are not worth more than your employer is paying you, then it would be cheaper for them to fire you. So one of the key things we talked about at the last webinar, which you can watch on the APS website, is how to have a career in which you are creating more value. And that's really a key issue in mid-career, is that you've got to generate value, and not just generate value, but generate value that the organization recognizes is valuable and that they need, okay? And also, you hold special skills, knowledge, and abilities, SKAs. You hold special skills, knowledge, and abilities, it would be hard for them to replace. So there's also a cost for them to change course. And then the other thing, which we talked about in both webinars, is that it is very critical in how you show up every day. Projecting a positive and proactive attitude helps people believe that you are willing to contribute and be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. And so one of the key things is, it's very easy in mid-career, especially once you have other family responsibilities, or you have other things going on in your life, it's very easy to kind of keep the job in a box. But you always have to spend a small amount of your work week, a small amount of your work month, cultivating new opportunities. Don't live in a cave, because if you live in a cave, people won't appreciate the value that you're bringing to your organization. It's really important. All right, so Woody Allen said, I don't know where, I tried to look up this quote last night, Woody Allen, 80% of success is just showing up. And I would say that it sounds funny, but there's actually a real amount of truth to this. And that is that a lot of people choose not to engage. They don't engage beyond just what they're told to do. And as a result, they can kind of become invisible in an organization. So just showing up, being visible, is part of career resilience, and actually can turn over new opportunities for career advancement. So what does it mean when I say to show up? What I mean is, when you have an opportunity, for example, an organization-wide initiative, a new committee on diversity, equity, inclusion, or a safety committee, or something like that, that's not part of your regular gig, say yes. Say yes as often as you can, whenever you can afford the time and you can afford to balance what you've got to do on your day job with some of these other activities. These organizational activities, when they happen, are really early ways in which organizations cultivate leaders, cultivate people that are going to be part of the future. Also, I will say, we are physicists, we are smart, we can also see the flaws in situations. As frustrating as it may be at some points in your career, your cynicism is best kept to yourself, even when it is richly deserved. And even though you've got lots of people of varying capabilities, always trying to remind yourself that the others are doing their best, or assume the others are the best around you. Yes, eventually they'll prove you wrong, but this issue of attitude is something that's really critical for not ending up being somebody who they wonder, is this person really right here? Another way to frame this is, be a solution person instead of a problem person. When you see issues around you, it's one thing to point to the problem, oh, this doesn't work or that doesn't work. The strategy of the solution person is to say, hey, this isn't working well, and we might want to try this, or we might want to change that. To show up to your management as both somebody who identifies problems and proactively seeks solutions is a very positive stance to take in your career. Now, one thing that happened to me actually in midlife, it's kind of funny. I went all the way until I was about 40 when I discovered this book, Now Discover Your Strengths. And the idea of strengths is something that career development coaches often go to, and it's very natural for people to engage in career development during an early part of your career, like as you're embarking on your career. But I think that career development, to some extent, is something that you should always engage in at a small level. And this book showed up when I was, I think, 40. And it was a really interesting study. It's actually done by the Gallup organization. And they did this huge survey to try to determine why some companies and some organizations seem to be naturally high performing. And the answer that came back after all this data collection was that some organizations seem to do a good job of putting people where they use their strengths. So what is a strength? Well, they define strength as the ability to provide consistent, near perfect performance in a specific given activity. That is what a strength is, something that you do really well. And in particular, a strength is not just something you do well, but you actually get energized by doing it. Something that you just do well, you enjoy, you actually leave feeling strong and energized by using it. Now, the reason this is really important for people at midlife is that early in your life, in all your physics in school, a lot of the kind of stuff we were working on were kind of academic skills-based stuff. But as we have moved into midlife, strengths grow as we begin to do stuff in the workplace. And in particular, a strength is produced when you have some innate talent or skill, but you combine it with knowledge and skill and experience, okay? And that's what builds a strength. Now, the reason I like this book is that in my early career, I was always framing myself technically in terms of my technical strengths. Was I a good programmer? Was I a good experimental scientist? Was I a good this or not a good that? I was always putting myself in the context of specific technical skills. But what this book does, and this instrument, what you do is you buy this book, and then there's an online survey you take, and then you get essentially, through answering a bunch of questions, an analysis of what your top 5 strengths are. And they have 38 strengths, and you don't need to read all these. But as you look at these, you can see that these are not technical skills. These are work skills. These are ways in which you show up at work. And there's some ways that you do a really good job, that you are really excellent. And many of us, honestly, don't have a clean appreciation for what those key strengths are. And that's what makes this book and this instrument so valuable. And why I found it so valuable is that the things I was doing well, but I didn't have a name for them. And this book gave me names for my top 5 skills and helped clarify for me where I should be seeking to have my biggest impact. Where I can create the greatest value in my organization is where I have strengths. And if I understand my strengths, then I can look at my organization and understand how can I apply those strengths in a way that creates the best value in my organization. And to some extent, a strength is like a superpower. It's something that you know how to do, and everybody has strengths. That's one of the other things that's nice about this instrument is it's not like some people are stronger than the others. Just people have different distributions of strengths. Having a name for them and being able to understand for yourself how you use them is one of the key insights for mid-career advancement. Show up like a superhero. Now, another thing that we commonly talk about at the March meeting workshop is this issue of networking. And it's common that people think, oh, networking is something I need to do when I'm looking for a job or when I'm, embarking on my career. And I stress to people that networking is not a job searching strategy. It is a career advancement strategy. And networking is, a lot of people sort of talk about it generally, but here's my very succinct definition for networking. Networking is developing relationships with people. It's really all it is. And in particular, people who share your personal and professional interests, including your colleagues at work and all these other people around you. Most importantly, networking is also alerting them to your goals and abilities, which gets back to my strength thing. If you have a clear understanding of what you do well, making sure that the people around you know that you do those things well gives them the opportunity to give you more assignments like that. Okay? Networking is not this. Okay? It is not some, kind of sales pitchy, pushy, obnoxious, schmoozy thing. It's not schmoozing for a job, and it's not restricted to slick and superficial people. In fact, honestly, I actually think slick and superficial people aren't very good networkers because I don't think they do a good job of forming strong personal relationships, which is what networking is fundamentally about. building relationships with people, okay? And even for those of you who are very introverted, you might think, well, I'm not so good at, that's not true. Introverts and extroverts simply approach networking differently. Extroverts derive energy from meeting strangers and getting to know people. Introverts take energy to get to know people, but they tend to form deeper and stronger bonds. And so even if you feel like you're an introvert, you are an excellent networker. So who is my network? I have a very specific definition of this. It's not just anybody you can talk to, but I'd say that somebody joins your network when you know them well enough that you feel comfortable asking a specific favor from them. That's my threshold. And when somebody joins your network, you are willing to ask a favor of them. And so that means that really anybody who you know can be in your network, schoolmates, and the what I call C to the fourth, kind of the collection of people in your work environment, collaborators, colleagues, clients, and consultants. All those people are part of your network, even if you might work for them and they're a client of yours. Friends from high school and college can be great members of your network. Family members can be great members of your network. People you meet at seminars, conferences, and workshops, and most importantly, anybody they know. One of the key things about networks is that you have your friends, and your friends know you, but you don't know who your friends know. Your friends might know these other people, and because you're friends together, they're willing to introduce you to people they know. And that's really the key value of tools like LinkedIn. Now, I know that, especially when I talk about LinkedIn in physics communities, a lot of people roll their eyes. Oh, that's so businessy. Oh, I don't need that. Or like, my resume speaks for itself, or even my publications speak for themselves. No, no, no. One of the key advantages of having a strong LinkedIn profile is that you can not just link to your friends, but you can then learn who your friends know. And in a work environment, you can figure out if you have a question about something that's going on in another organization and you don't know anybody, you can use your network to find somebody who can give you that answer. And this is true in business. And most people kind of appreciate that at least 70% of business connections, 70% of deals, 70% of projects are won because people know of other people. It's a reputation and a friendship-based process. And so one of the key things that I always recommend to people at mid-career is keep your LinkedIn updates. It's very easy to kind of let it slip, go for years, not updating it, but it shows. And so this is part of you presenting yourself as a professional in mid-career, is giving the world a nice view of you and your background and experience. Now, one of the key things I feel very strongly about is because we are Homo sapiens, and Homo sapiens are designed to react to human faces, it's really important for you to think carefully about your image that is on LinkedIn. So I strongly recommend that you don't have to get it professional. I love Tatiana's, it's nice, engaging, but don't do what my friend Alexi did, which looks like kind of a weird driver's license shot. Spend the time, have a nice picture taken of you. And from time to time, update that picture, because that really shows people that you are out and engaged. Because if you think about it this way, what do you want your image to be? You don't have to be like Miss or Mr. Business Person, but just be intentional in the images you select for yourself. What professional face do you want to project? What would a potential funder think when viewing your profile? What would a potential new employer think when viewing your profile? So those things are the reasons why LinkedIn is a very, very important anchor point for the messaging you give to the world at large about yourself as a professional and where you could potentially go next. Now, as you know, LinkedIn has a reverse chronological order. And in some ways, people have asked me like, well, should I just like put up my resume somewhere? Well, no, in some respects, LinkedIn allows you to tell stories about your past achievements and work history, right? So you give descriptions which are quantitative and specific, action-rich past tense verbs describing what you have achieved. And when people are willing to give you a recommendation, it's really nice that you get that. But that reverse chronological order gives people an ability to understand your background. Now, I've seen some other great variations. You can put publications into your LinkedIn profile. You can put patents into your profile. This is another friend of mine, and he does both publications. And one of the things he did, which I really like, is rather than just cutting and pasting the abstract from the publication or from the patent, he wrote a nice brief description of what the research or what the project was and why it was valuable. And this, to my mind, really showed that he was able to show the connections between the technical work he was doing and the impact he was having in these various organizations. And I really just thought this was a great example of using the LinkedIn profile as a basis of presenting yourself as a technical professional. And then, of course, there are the LinkedIn groups. There are more than 1 million LinkedIn groups now. Crazy. Practically every company has an associated LinkedIn group. There's lots of chat things. And I have found, especially when I am researching something or trying to go deep in a particular subject, these LinkedIn groups, when I can join one and like scroll through past questions and also ask questions, it's remarkable the depth of insight I get. Even more importantly, as you think about yourself in mid-career, how you show up, it could be that one of these groups contains thousands of people, and thoughtful, well-considered posts on of you that you have done could end up being a way in which people get to know you and say, oh, that person's kind of interesting. I'd like to maybe reach out to them and learn more about what they're doing. Recruiters often go to these groups and try to understand who's out there. And this is another area where it becomes relevant in midlife, as we'll talk about, is that mid-career, this is the point at which job transition can often be accelerated because a recruiter has been hired to find somebody, and that somebody might be you. Just want to remind you a little bit about LinkedIn etiquette. I get one of these at least 2 or 3 a day. And this is the robotic kind of LinkedIn. I'd like to add you to my professional network. Now, remember what I said earlier about networking being relationships with people? One of the things that I really try to stress is that people need to be addressed directly. So rather than use the robotic thing, or God forbid, you press the button on your on the cell phone app and it sends it to everybody in your contact list. Instead of that, always just use even the briefest personalized message. Nice to meet you at UC San Diego on Saturday. That personalized message just really helps anchor who this person is. And sometimes you can even just be a little more complimentary, or even you can ask people for questions. But when I get a LinkedIn request from somebody I don't know, who has no personal message for me or no way to contextualize why they want to link to my network, I don't accept those links. And I don't accept those links for 2 reasons. One, I mean, obviously it could be some Hungarian or Russian bot that's trying to get my personal information. But more importantly, my LinkedIn network is my network, and I would not just share it with anybody I find off the street. I'd want to be thoughtful about who I'm connecting to and why. So those are just some LinkedIn rules of the road that I use. And I also often find also that LinkedIn is just a good news stream for me in my professional business. I often uncover some really interesting stories there first. Now, I talked about the definition of networking being somebody who you know well enough or feel comfortable asking a favor from. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is, like, ask a favor like this. Would you please introduce me to so-and-so who I see is in your network? That's a favor. Could you forward my resume or latest reprint or publication, et cetera, to this person? Or could you provide a reference for me if so-and-so calls if I've applied for a job? Or can you just tell me the latest about such and such? I'm having a discussion later this week with somebody who would like to have a little bit firmer footing. Those are all examples of favors, right? And send me a copy. Can you send me a copy of a report or something else? If you know a person well enough to ask a sort of favor like this, that means, to my mind, that they are part of your network. Now, in the workshop, we talk a lot about resumes and CVs because those are common ways in which you document your achievements for a job search. But what should you have if you're not actively looking to change jobs? I recommend you always keep up to date, in addition to your LinkedIn profile, a bio. And a bio is got much of the same information as a resume or a CV, but it's in narrative form in reverse chronological order. And like a resume or a CV, a bio gives people an understanding of your past accomplishments and work history and key achievements. So I recommend that, physicists at mid-career, you construct a 1-paragraph bio that you drop into an email, a 3-paragraph bio, and even a 1-page bio. You can have the same image that you have from your LinkedIn profile, you can use in the bio. And again, you don't always have to send something with an image, but I find bios really attractive because it doesn't make you look like a job seeker. What it makes you look like is a professional that can tell their story and explain how they've had impact in past organizations. Okay, a few other what I would call professionalism items. 1, business cards. Sorry, they aren't out of date yet. I don't care if you've got a scan blocker, etc. But frankly, business cards are a courtesy. They are a courtesy. You know why? Like here. Okay, I have one right here. Oh, see. Okay, so I meet somebody, right? We shake hands and says, "Oh, my name is Lucas," and I didn't hear their last name. I'm like, ah, and I want to stay in contact, but then Lucas says, here's my card. If for any reason you want to reach out to me, here's a means to do so. And you know what it is? It's just simple courtesy. It's like, thank you. You've given me away, even if it just ends up on my desk right back there, my pile. Even if it just ends up on my desk, it's an act of courtesy that you have given me an ability to reach out to you. Okay, and I would say you may have them, but you always forget them. I know, because I forget them, right? I have to actually, when I go on a trip, I have to remember to bring a Ziploc bag with some of my cards because I forget them. And then I meet somebody and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I don't have a card." And, I feel bad that I can't give them contact information, but they probably feel like, well, this guy doesn't really care about, connecting to me anymore. That's not a great message to send. Also, make sure your information is updated. I know we like to recycle and get through all 500 cards, but it's okay. You can throw them out and get things updated. Here's another little pet peeve of mine. In your email signature block, sometimes companies have good policies and they force stuff, but oftentimes I see that people don't include any contact information, which again, I know that I can email you, but if I need to call you or something else, it's nice to be able to have that information. So just make sure that your email signature block has got all that stuff. 2 little items of, I would say, mid-career professionalism. Okay, now that's about you and your job and your life today, you kind of developing a healthy engagement with the world around you, and from time to time, opportunities are going to intersect, right? But there are times when you might ask yourself, maybe I want to actually have more direction. I actually want to move in a certain direction. Maybe I even want to go back for more school. Yikes. And the simple fact is that you won't be able to learn everything that you need just by studying by yourself. It's, some things you can eventually pick up new skill sets, but in a very haphazard and disorganized way. Also, many organizations, including yours, probably have budgets for employee professional development. And I know many technical professionals who never even bother to ask what might be available for professional development. And professional development in an industrial setting comes in all sorts of shapes and sizes. So for example, organizations will have an outside consultant come in for an hour-long lunchtime seminar, or there might be a workshop series. Spend the time and attend those. There are even day-long workshops and offsites. Sometimes your HR department might run negotiating for beginners or sales strategies. Those are great workshops, even if you're in the technical side, to avail yourself on. And your company is paying for them anyway. Of course, in some cases, it might make sense to explore the pathway for getting some particular credentialing, a training, or certification. So for example, if you are in a technical sector that makes products, it might be interesting or make sense to understand what some of these manufacturing certifications are. Kanban and 5 Sigma and 5 0001, et cetera. These are all specific curricula that your company can give you. And once you get it, it becomes a new asset that you can present to people. And then, of course, there are degree programs, actual places where you go to school and you would obtain a new degree. Now, we'll talk about that. But, you know, in-person training, the other thing, LinkedIn has a lot of recorded trainings. And I've checked out a couple that are really good, but it's just you alone with your laptop. And I think that sometimes in-person training, one of the real secrets of in-person training is it's not just what you learn, it's who you learn with and the value of connecting to the other people who are in that workshop. This is often the only time that you get to meet a wide range of people across your organization, right? And so it's a really valuable networking experience to do some of these professional development activities. Now, I went back 6 years after my PhD, and I ended up getting an MBA. And a lot of people ask me, so Peter, was it worth it? And is it the killer combination, or is it the killer of social life, or, you know, how did it work? And so I'd simply say that I don't have a straight answer for you. Everybody needs to explore the path on their own. But one of the key questions you might ask yourself with any sort of professional degree, it doesn't have to be an MBA. It could be a master's in public administration. It could be a master's. It could be a JD, you know, a legal degree. But simply understanding what career pathways get opened up when you have that second professional degree. And that means talking to people. Ideally, talk to people who have a physics degree and then did this second professional degree and find out how they did it, where they did it, and what was the pathway that opened up for them after they did it, okay? Now, the other thing is quality matters. There are online programs, again, just like LinkedIn, you can download and watch webinars to your heart's content. But strong programs, the best ones, tend to combine online and remote learning with in-person experiences. And again, in-person is valuable because of the people you meet. And so find a strong program, and frankly, a strong program that you could realistically attend. For example, here in California, I did the evening MBA program at UC Berkeley, and we had people not just from around the Bay Area, but we even had people from Southern California, and they came up once or twice a month to attend classes. So another piece of advice, don't quit your job if you don't have to, right? I didn't quit my job. I started my MBA while I was still a scientist at Lawrence Livermore Laboratory. I did the evening MBA program at UC Berkeley. There are also part-time MBAs, and those are ideally suited to mid-career professionals, especially technical professionals who want to move more into a management setting. And in some cases, employers will actually have resources to pay for the degree. So like, you don't lose your job, you actually get your tuition paid for, and you have career advancement. I mean, it's awesome. So do explore it carefully. Of course, there's often the times when you're like, I just got to get the hell out of this place. And that is a function of job change, right? And I will say that job change is actually the most common mode of career advancement. What I mean by that is that often you get into a role in an organization, you can stay in that role for a while. And if the opportunity to vault up doesn't happen, pretty much your only way to move forward is to potentially take another job at a higher kind of level of responsibilities at another organization. It's very common to do this now. It's very common for people to go from organization A up to organization B and then back to organization A. In fact, many high-performing organizations will actually move their mid-career professionals around. They will give them professional development, and they will actually force them to take assignments in different parts of the country or different parts of the world, assignments that expose them to different parts of the business. Why? Because they're developing you. They're trying to help you grow. And by the way, the military does this. And I learned this lesson when I was working in the Pentagon, that, you know, we call these things generals, the people with all the like stars and bars on their shoulders. But the word general is actually short for general officer. When they take somebody from corporal to colonel, et cetera, they're actually teaching you to be more of a generalist. And that you culminate in becoming a general officer. And so similarly, as you have started your career as a technical professional, as a physicist, you are acquiring a broader and broader range of skills, ideally to the point where you can be a leader, a generalist who can solve a wide range of problems, but still have that technical background and technical instincts. Now, this is also, I mentioned, this is where search firms play. And let's be clear about, like, search firms are paid for by the people, seeking to fill the job, right? And they typically are paid as a portion of compensation. So, for example, a search firm might be engaged by Microsoft to look for, people experienced in AI programming, and they will go out and they will scour LinkedIn and they will scour all these places and they will find candidates and they will reach out to you and call you or send you an email. Oh, hey, I'm representing a client and they are interested in so-and-so. Can we talk? And so you find out that, in fact, they are trying to seek people for jobs. And this is where mid-career technical professionals often, if you get good at it, search firms can be a very valuable means of exploring other opportunities for you. Average Americans change jobs a lot. It is not strange. It's not unusual. And depending on where you go, it can actually be fun. Now, in addition to job change, which is maybe staying within the envelope of a career or an industry, but moving around, there is also the deeper change, career change. Like, I want to try something new. And career change is also normal, but it's not predictable, okay? And the reason it's not predictable is that sometimes you feel like, oh, I may want to do something, and it's just sort of a kind of an unstructured notion. But sometimes you're like, I really have been yearning to do this for a long time. So I think that there's several modes of career change. What I call maneuvering, and that is that you basically spend time, kind of positioning yourself either in your organization or with outside professional activities. You kind of position yourself to eventually move into a different career. And in this case, it might even involve school. It might involve some degree of re-credentialization. The second one I call is like morphing. And that is, I have seen people in a job, but that just has more and more scope in a certain area and more scope. And as they kind of like become an expert, that kind of expertise shifts to the point where, guess what? I'm no longer an electrical engineer. I'm actually a packaging expert. And so that is often what happens when you have kind of work scope shift, and it can happen gradually. Another mode I have seen in career change is what I call moonlighting. And that's basically that some people are doing some side work, maybe even with the permission of their employer. Maybe they're doing some consulting. Maybe you're doing some expert testimony for a lawsuit. And that side gig just becomes the main hustle because it is fun and attractive. And you get more and more opportunities. And then the last one I call just Monte Carlo. And that's just like you're at the right place at the right time. You're at the soccer field, your daughter's playing soccer, and you're talking to the parent next to you, and she's like, yeah, we're looking for a solid state person who knows wide bandgap semiconductors. And you're like, I did my PhD in wide bandgap semiconductors. Shut up! And you guys start talking, and pretty soon you get a job offer, and you're in a new industry. So it happens. Now, how it doesn't happen? It doesn't happen if you don't keep your blinders on. If you keep your head down and ignore all those other things, you can avoid career change. Maybe that's your preference, but I'm simply saying that a certain amount of career strategy at mid-career is keeping the bandwidth open. And this is how I think for those of you who have been at my workshop at the March meeting, you've seen me give you this example of these are real PhDs on the left, and this is where they ended up professionally on the right. Not all at once, and in any of those four categories I showed you, maneuvering, morphing, and Monte Carlo, those are all ways in which these people ended up here. But they are all demonstrating an important thing, and that is that you may be trained as a physicist, but you are also potentially a broadly adaptable problem solver. And this is really what came down to the heart of some of the best advice I ever got in my career. When I was in my graduate program near the end, we had a funny thing happen. I was in my fourth year, and Stanford's career planning and place, Stanford's Earth Science department had an external advisory board. And you've kind of remember these things when you were in college. These external advisors come into a department, they look over programs and give advice, et cetera, et cetera. And what was interesting was when I was in my fourth year in grad school, they invited a new person into Stanford's Earth Sciences advisory board. And it was an unusual person because normally these people are very senior, et cetera. This was a young person. They were only 12 years out of their PhD. They'd actually gotten their PhD at Stanford. And in only 12 years, they'd risen very high at Chevron Corporation. They were in charge of all exploration geophysics, I think, for all of Southeast Asia, which was like $1 billion portfolio, 12 years out of their PhD. And they invited this person back, and apparently, we didn't know this at the time, but she made one request of the dean's office. She said, I'll come back, I'll join your committee, but I want to have a private, off-the-record lunch just with the grad students. Can you set that up for me? And the dean was like, oh, sure, I guess, yeah. And us fourth year grad students, all we knew was that, hey, we're getting free lunch at the dean's office. So we all show up, and this woman proceeded over the course of a fascinating lunch to tell us so much about what her life was like now running a large organization. She talked about what her week was like and what her day was like. She talked about things she wished she had done differently at Stanford, courses she wished she had taken. It was amazing because we'd never met somebody like this before. And toward the end of the lunch, I kind of raised my hand and asked a somewhat glib question and said, if you could summarize, your success in a formula, what would it be? And without missing a beat, she said, it's the 80-10-10 rule. I said, I'm not familiar with the 80-10-10 rule. She said, well, here's what it is. She said, 80% of my work week I spend focused on the most important problems in front of me. She said that you've gone up to life at this point, especially getting into, a graduate school like Stanford, and you have always been doing all your homework. Every assignment that you've been given you've come back and done it perfectly. And she said, in the real world, you will have more things come at you than you will have time to deal with them. In fact, the definition of a real job is having more things to do than hours to do them. And so you need to learn how to selectively choose those subset of things that will have the biggest impact in your organization, and the stuff that's marginal, you need to blow off. You need to not do that stuff. You need to skip some of your homework. And all of us were like, what? Skip our homework? Oh my God. 10% of my work week, she said, I spend solely focused on my own personal and professional development. I close my door. My executive assistant holds my calls. I read outside my field. I meet people in finance at Chevron. I meet people in finance at Morgan Stanley, not because it has anything to do with any of my current projects, but solely to grow myself as a professional. I spend 10% of my week focused on that. My employer pays for that, and they should. They should, because if I continue to invest in myself, if I continue to grow, I become a more valuable asset for Chevron. If I choose not to do that work, if I choose to just sit in my hole and get my work done, I'm going to basically depreciate. And so I said, so what's the final 10%? She chuckled and said, well, the final 10% of my work week, I spend telling as many people as possible what a good job I'm doing the 80% of the time I'm actually doing my job. And we all had a chuckle, but at the end of that session, I realized that part of being a successful professional, whether you're a physicist or anything, is that you are committing a certain fraction of your work time to growing yourself. And that was something I've tried to do ever since. Because everything you've done so far, your physics training, research, whatever it is, that's great. Your education gave you this wonderful, deep and specific knowledge, right? It's like the keel of a boat. And keels are great because keels keep the boat from tipping over. But if that's all you are at mid-career is a specialist in one field, you have a very narrow range of options, okay? And so you need to develop, in addition to that subject matter expertise, a crossbar of adaptability, problem solving, drive, and leadership. And that's the sort of stuff that you acquire on your own. That's what, in a way, kind of the joy of mid-career is taking this wonderful technical depth that you've acquired and learning how to apply it in a broader range of things. And also, realize that technical professionals, we do have some stereotypes we need to address, right? Because according to many business people, people like us, technical people, are simple-minded about money, impractical about time, have no sense of deadlines, and socially passive and value ideals as absolutes. It is also possible that people might see physicist at the end of your name or whatever, and that they might worry that you're a hermit and not a leader, that you're arrogant and not a team player, that you're a rebel and not an organizer, or a problem person as opposed to a solution person. So my advice to you is simply this: make sure that when you tell stories about yourself, when you describe what you do, that you make sure that you tell stories in which you have managed large projects on time, and that you have good sense of deadlines, and that you are a problem solver and not a problem person. And also think about your own misconceptions. Even though the joys of the technical background and the technical work that you're doing now are wonderful, you can very easily look at people in management and say, oh God, how dreadful they are. But they also have some very keen and interesting technical and intellectual challenges that they face. And so don't be afraid to ask people in sales or in HR even what they do and what their challenges are. That sort of networking within your organization can be enormously beneficial for you to understand other career pathways for yourself. Okay, we're going to wrap up and we're going to take questions. So please put questions in the Q&A. And I'm just going to wrap up with a few final comments. You know, the myth and realities of the modern job market is you're always thinking about, you know, pathways forward. And in the technical backgrounds that we've come from, it's very natural for you to think that you should find a job that matches your technical skills. But skills, values, and interests are all critical aspects of finding a fulfilling career. Thomas Friedman wrote in Lexis and the Olive Tree, you always end up overvaluing what you know and undervaluing what's in plain sight. So we overvalue our technical background and our technical accomplishments. We undervalue all that broad knowledge that we developed along the way. Myth number 2, employers care only about technical skills for PhDs or physicists. No, no, no. Employers care about a lot of things in addition to technical skills. They care about personality, degree of fit, learning ability, leadership, communication skills, persuasion skills, and drive. A senior hiring manager told me that we hire for attitude and train for skills. Finally, myth number 3, you should map out your career trajectory many years into the future because, of course, life is certain. You will find that in mid-career, you will see people around you who seem to kind of uncover kind of really interesting opportunities. And all they've done is simply opened their aperture to allow for side signal to come in, to allow for serendipity, unplanned detours, and yes, even setbacks. Even a layoff can end up being the excuse you needed to finally embark on something new. The people who can exploit chance opportunities, explore new areas, and even make the best of setbacks tend to be happier and more successful. And when I interviewed people for my book, people who'd taken a physics degree and gone to a wide variety of career fields, almost all of them said something like this quote here. 5 years ago, I would have never predicted that I would have ended up here. It is impossible to know all the possible pathways you could go on in your career. And so being open to possibility is really the magic step. All right, that's it for my prepared remarks. Stephanie, I think we have a couple questions in the Q&A, and so I am happy to take questions for as long as people want. And everybody, this is going to, recording is going to be available on the APS website, and I am looking forward to hearing from you. So with that, I'm going to end my presentation, and let's find out from people.
Awesome. Thank you, Peter. Yeah, we have a few really exciting questions here. This one I want to throw out there. I feel like you touched upon this a little bit, but there might be some more specifics that we can highlight. So the question is, are there any notable challenges that mid-career physicists commonly face when transitioning into industry roles? And how can they overcome these challenges?
Well, when you say industry roles, you mean moving out of a technical role into a managerial role?
There's no specifics about that one, but I would think about transitioning into industry. It doesn't seem like it's from academia into industry, but maybe just changing roles within the industry, kind of like
Sure.
way.
Well, so I would say for starters, Stephanie.
You are muted, Peter. So, yeah. There we go.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so for starters, Stephanie, people can do major career changes at any point. It takes work, but I have known people, tenured professors in physics, who have left academia and gotten into into industry. Those pathways take careful calculus. And one of the ways that people do it is, as I said, in those four kind of like different modes of career change. Sometimes people have very specifically, you know, maneuvered their research scope in a particular direction so that they're doing more and more applied work. And so they are moving. Maybe they're partnering more and more with a particular company or organization to the point where the organization says, this is ridiculous, you should just join us. And then you say, yes, I'd love to join you. And you're out of there. Sometimes people move geographically. Sometimes a spouse might move somebody. I had a really interesting, I've had several friends who had spouses who were on an academic kind of path, which means you get jerked out of University of Wisconsin and end up at, Virginia Polytechnic. And the quote unquote trailing spouse, on the one hand, felt like, I'm going to have to move my career because there's not a room for both of us at this institution. At the same time, they ended up finding that very liberating, because they were able to open their mind to a much wider range of opportunities. And interestingly, I've only a data set of 3 on this, Stephanie, but all 3 cases of friends of mine, 2-body problem friends of mine, the leading spouse kind of went to this new gig and it was like, meh. And the trailing spouse went to a new career and was like, had a fabulous time. So it's kind of ironic. Sometimes the trailing spouse is a better place to be.
Yeah, that actually happened to me, and it definitely took my career down a path I never would have imagined, but I also wouldn't be sitting here today had that opportunity not presented itself for
That's right.
our families. So you kind of just have to go with it, sometimes. All right. So thinking about like imposter syndrome, specifically around like moving through your career stages. This might involve like being in a technical position and maybe moving to a management position. Like, how do you deal with like this idea that you want them to feel like you belong, kind of like with this imposter syndrome space or in the space? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'd say that one of the things, to some extent, imposter syndrome is an extreme version of something that is appropriate, and that is that I've got stuff to learn here, right? And it's always healthy to come into a new frame and say, I've got stuff to learn here, and that's great. And I would say the difference between that and like, I'm an imposter, I don't belong here, is simply that your maybe lack of faith in yourself is like, look, you're a smart person. By the way, Stephanie, one of the reasons why I love working with APS and the community of physicists at APS is you all are really smart, okay? You pick stuff up quickly. And so even though circumstance might drop you into a different world and you're like, wow, I'm the only one like me here, or like everybody else has been in this setting for 5 years and I'm brand new. One of the key things you're good at is asking good questions. Another key thing you're good at is making sense of data. These are 2 skills that you have. And I think that imposter syndrome can be overcome with some understanding that of humility of entering a new group. But also, one of the ways that can overcome imposter syndrome is people might be busy. Some people might, like in their brusqueness or their busyness, might glide past you and leave you feeling a little unwelcome. Seek out those few people, however, who do have an instinct for mentorship. And one of the things that I found is that, like, in your career, the need for mentorship never goes away. You always benefit from having other people in your organization. Maybe they're older, maybe they're younger, but they're simply willing to, kind of engage with you and be thoughtful about listening to what you're dealing with and giving you feedback and advice.
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, Peter. That's a really awesome point. And the mentorship piece is super important. And again, I talked a little bit about our industry mentoring program that APS offers. So definitely want to throw that out there. Again, it's called Impact. We're always looking for incredible mentors and mentees and students to join the platform. Or if you're mid-career and you just want to chat with somebody about what it might be like in a specific industry. So definitely check that out. And you said something there, Peter, that connected me to this next question. And it was, share with me how you feel about career coaches and coaching services that are available. Is that something you would recommend kind of mid-career? Do you see value in this?
Absolutely. Actually, I think that, honestly, I think that we are waking up to coaching. It's kind of interesting, Stephanie. I feel like 15 or 20 years ago, people looked at coaches like when you got laid off. Oh, I need like a job search person. Now people look at it as continual improvement. And I think career coaches, they're flavors, they're individual one-on-one coaching, and you can do that virtually. It's very, very easy. There are also groups. I have been part of a group of executives, and we met once a month for 3 hours, and it was incredibly nourishing and just kind of in a way realizing that you're not alone. You realize that a lot of other people encounter the similar challenges to you, and you often get really good ideas. And so those group things, they can be pretty economical too. And so you don't have to be shelling out thousands of dollars for an individual coach. You can find kind of groups where that makes sense. So yeah, coaching is big, and I think it's only going to get bigger.
Thank you. So this is going to kind of shift gears a little bit. Tell us about your experiences developing relationships with your colleagues and how that has shifted now, like if you are working remotely, and how do you continue to just build those relationships amongst your coworkers in a remote setting so that you can create this potential for career advancement in the future?
Yeah, great question. So I started, for those of you who know what I do, I run this major research program out of Lawrence Berkeley Lab on desalination. But we have members of our leadership team around the country, and we fund research projects around the country. So we've always had this degree of virtualness. During COVID, we actually started Thursday wine night. So at 4:30, still on the company clock, we all basically, with all the leadership team, poured a glass of wine, and we basically just hung out for about an hour. And that was great. And it was really that whole year we did that. It's now tapered back substantially because we meet in person. The second thing is, in virtual environments, companies are thinking a lot about how do we constitute the connections, the real-time connections of meeting in person. And so sometimes if you're in a situation where you are feeling like, look, we are kind of very isolated, suggesting to your management that you have a one-day retreat, a physical retreat where everybody shows up somewhere, or even an entire multi-day retreat. These are the sorts of things that organizations are thinking about in terms of reconstituting and reconnecting people to each other. And so, those ideas are some of the things that I have implemented. And the other thing is basically, as I said, that, your work has the potential to consume every amount of time that you give it. And so forcing some, I want to call it downtime, but networking time. I heard some really interesting advice. One very famous venture capitalist basically once a day basically took their phone and just spun the dial and found somebody in their contact list and called them. Hey, just checking in. What's going on? And he told us a really interesting stat. He said at least 50% of the time, a random call with somebody who he knew uncovered like some important insight. And so he's like addicted to it. He says like it takes about 20 minutes out of my day, flip, boom, hey, what's going on? So I thought those were interesting ways of staying connected.
That's great. It's no longer like the pocket dial, where the person's like, whoa, did you just randomly call me? No, there was intentionality around that call.
Exactly.
I love that. And I think you just somewhat answered one of our guests' questions. So going back to the 80-10-10, if we're going to spend, let's say 20% of our day or our time. That's essentially 1 day a week. How do we build that into our critical job responsibilities? And I think you just shared one way. If it's building relationships with our coworkers, I mean, to me, that seems part of the critical job responsibility, right? And it's also helping our professional growth. Can you tell me other ways in which you may kind of connect that 20% of the 80-10-10 to your critical job responsibilities?
Yeah. And it's a great question. I've had variations of that question, but people wisely observe, like, wow, that's 20%. That's like 1 day a week you're not doing your job, Peter. How do you get away with that? And the answer, for starters, is like, try not to be super conspicuous, right? I mean, try, first of all, to make sure that the 80% of the time you are doing your work, you are having high impact. And I would say my 80-10-10 varies. There's certainly periods of time where I'm in crunch mode and that's all I'm doing. But I always try to enforce it. Sometimes the way I will do it is also just make appointments to call people. And so like negotiate, like we had our renewal proposal due at the end of July, and it was just complete, kind of, that sort of month of hell getting that proposal done. But I booked a whole bunch of calls in August, 30-minute calls with people. Hey, it's been 6 months since we talked. I'd love to hear what's going on with you. And I've got an update on such and such. And again, when you put it in your calendar, it's sort of like part of your work, I think.
Agreed. Absolutely. So thinking about, you did share a lot about values in your talk today. And
Yeah.
so how do you know, and how can you find out if a company's values are what they say that they are? So how do we identify if these values of these organizations are aligned with our own, and to help us with those transitions in our career?
Yeah. Well, I would say for starters, your network is one of the most valuable resources to help you understand what's the underlying culture or the underlying brand below a company, right? And yeah, every company wants to dish out some wonderful, lofty stuff. But culture is it's impossible to hide. And I think that people who know an organization can tell you, here's some of the key things. And there are other questions you can ask. It's like, besides just like, what's the company culture really like? You can ask specific questions. Do people work, how hard do people work here? Or like, what do you observe the behaviors are of people who advance in this organization? What are the things you see have gotten people ahead in this organization? Other great questions, including, what does this organization think is one of its past most important achievements? Like, the stories an organization tells about itself end up being very revealing about the underlying culture of an organization. And like, for example, if an organization has like a founder or somebody and all the stories are about that person, don't be surprised if it's got a little cult of personality kind of thing to it, right? Because those are the only stories they're telling, right? If the stories that people tell are only about certain types of success or wins or aggressive behavior, that may not be a bad thing, but it's clarifying, right? These are all ways. And if you don't know anybody who works in the organization, somebody in your network knows somebody. This is where networking, it's rarely the case that you know the person in the organization to talk to. It is almost always the case that somebody in your network knows somebody in the organization that you should talk to.
Yeah, that is so true. Thank you.
I want to answer Victoria's question. Can I answer Victoria's question?
Oh, please do. Yeah, that was what I was going to throw out. I wanted this to kind of be our last question.
Yeah, great question, Victoria. Love your question. Okay.
But
what's different about mid-career?
Yeah, that's the one. But I wanted to frame it in the sense of, like, I love how incredible your content is and how interchangeable it is. And so I feel like I want to know your answer to this question, because, is it really that different? But go for it, Peter. And you can.
Okay, Stephanie, we're mid-career people. I'm maybe toward that high end of that. Okay, admit it. Look, you got stuff in your life at mid-career. Girl, you got kids, you got a house, you got a cat, you've got like parents. Like when you're early career, you know, you fly off with your friend, you do some crazy stuff, or the degrees of freedom early in your career are great. By mid-career, there's all sorts of other forbidden transitions. You come home, hey, honey, they want talking about a great opportunity in Hong Kong. Don't even think about that. Oh, okay. Okay. So yeah, you've got constraint, right? At the same time, I think that what you have at mid-career is you're coming into your own professionally. You're coming into your own capability, right? You started off with a theory of action, a theory of achievement, and you're coming into your own about where you actually are. That's why I found like Strength Finder to be so powerful, so powerful. Is that we often don't really appreciate what we're good at until we've been out there a while. You're like, oh, huh, I'm not so great at that. Interesting. Okay. Or like, you know what? I'm unhappy doing that, but I'm really happy doing that. What does that tell me? That's what mid-career, that's the joy of mid-career, I think, is coming into your own and developing your unique impact.
I love that. Yep, absolutely becomes a little bit more complicated as you journey through life. And I think it is important to notice those things, you know. But I do see a lot of the information that you bring forward is applicable kind of in all settings, but there are definitely some unique situations mid-career for sure.
Yeah.
So
Well, Stephanie, yeah.
I love it. Yep. So
Yeah.
we are going to wrap up now. I do want to just follow up with a few final things and just also remind you that the recording will be made available on the APS web page, but allow 2 to 3 business days for that to be uploaded. And then also, please give us a moment to provide some feedback as you leave today. We really appreciate the thoughts and the time to fill out the survey. We do look at the data and we do use the data for our future.
Yeah, and also, yeah, I'd love getting advice from you. So let me know other things that you wanted to hear about, and we will continue to grow this program. And we just all, I mean, I know I speak from Stephanie and Crystal and everybody at APS. You guys are extraordinary people. We love serving you, and go out there and do great work. And we love to hear your stories. Thanks very much.
Yeah, absolutely. We truly appreciate your time and spending some of your day with us. And always, at any time, let us know if there's any content that you'd like us to develop for webinars on. And this, again, American Physical Society, copyright 2023, all rights reserved. We appreciate you and have a wonderful day.
Bye, everybody. Take care.